Morning, morning. So, Ericsson, this networking company down the road here, I think you're all familiar with it. We also do a little bit of mobility, so I thought I'll share a few facts about what's happening on the mobile side around the world to start off with. And of course, it's great to be here in this OpenDaylight Summit and share some of these things with you. So today we have around 6.5 billion subscriptions, mobile subscriptions in the world. And we have around 200 million subscriptions for LTE, so it's still tiny numbers, most of it here in North America, in Korea and in Japan, but it's growing at a phenomenal pace. In fact, in only 5 years, we will have more than 9 billion subscriptions around the world, and we will have more than 2.5 billion subscriptions on LTE. So there's a phenomenal uptake of LTE around the world that we project. Now, this is phenomenal growth in terms of subscriptions, in terms of data, but it's also a big change in these networks. So what we're looking at is rapid development on the mobility side and big change. Going from, in some cases, I think we heard about GSM is still working in parts of the world, 2G to 3G, 3G to LTE, LTE to LTE advanced, and what comes after with 5G. So I will share a little bit of that as well. At the same time, we have this technology shift in terms of building out coverage with new technology. So I think this is a good lead into what we see now on the fixed, on the IP, and on the IT side, and the need for change in the rest of the network, not only on the mobility side. And what are the change drivers then? Well, it's very much about opening up for new growth opportunities, business opportunities, the innovation on top of the network. And here you have a senior VP of technology from one of our customer service provider who really believe that providing cloud-based services, outsourcing from on-premise to cloud-based enterprise offerings is the way forward. And you need to do that with lots of innovation. Speed, and it's really speed to new services. This is about introducing new network services in minutes or seconds, not in 30 days sending these faxes and emails back and forth. And it's really about efficiency, taking out cost of the infrastructure, opening up for new type of services by streamlining the whole operations. And of course, what we're going to talk about today with cloud and SDN is fundamental enablers to do that. Over the last decade, we've seen two big global networks that have achieved scale or global scale. One, obviously, mobility and mobile. As I said, 6.5 billion subscriptions already today, reaching 90% of the world's population in just 5 years' time with 3G and LTE. No doubt that's a very thriving and growing ecosystem. Billions of people, reliability, interoperability. But we also have, on the web scale side or on the web side, basically the same type of uptake. Billions of apps, very much focused on using the bandwidth or consuming the bandwidth, not optimizing so much to start with. And then, of course, speed of innovation. And these two sides have, over the last years, now come together in what we term the mobile broadband. Mobile broadband bringing internet to everyone around the world. So these two scale networks are the fundamentals of what will now become the next generation, or what we call the network society. Network society is where you combine mobile, the broadband infrastructure, and cloud, and you do it also for new industries. So you include the machine-to-machine and basically bring everyone on board on this common infrastructure. So all this is good. We have two examples of scale, global scale, that really has delivered what we believe is necessary, which is commonality across the systems and still differentiation at the top to be able to serve new demands, new industries, new user coming onto the networks. And these scale enablers that we have used, they are quite different. On the left-hand side, or on the mobility side, we have relied quite a lot on standards. They give an architecture to build to, functions are well specified, and interfaces are known. On the web side, more de facto, of course, very much about the implementation, very much about the open source. And you could argue whether there is now a very strong shift towards open source across the whole industry, and no doubt that is part of it, and we are very much part of driving that. But you can also see that these two means, they are both feasible for the future when it comes to driving openness, in terms of driving shared R&D, in terms of driving communities. So from our point of view, these two are also for the future very good enablers to drive scale. And in fact, not only on the IT side for the open source part and the de facto standards, and not only on the mobility side for the standards, in this middle part, in the fixed and the IP and the converged IT networks, that's where it's so obvious that we can now leverage both of these sides, both the standards as well as the open source and de facto standards. And I think we heard just earlier here some examples from the service provider space with a network function virtualization, the NFV, which will borrow obviously from the standard side and try to adopt as much as possible fast ways of building implementations in open source. So these two things complement each other very much going forward as we change the fundamental network, as we change everything in the fixed IP and the IT side. Because change is needed there. We still don't have enablement for rapid innovation. We still don't have the cost structure that we would like to have in this part of the network. So, again, we believe that these two approaches complement each other, very much so, and it's a coexistence approach that we are driving. We are also, of course, very pleased to be here at the first OpenDaylight Summit and take part in the build-up of the hydrogen release and of course everything that comes with this. We think that this is a good foundation. We see strong industry momentum. We would like to see even more. We see that this is a good base, just like many other open source projects that are now starting to come up in the industry. And we are very much also looking to incorporate parts from those areas. Of course, OpenStack is the obvious one, but also work happening in ONF and other places, very much helping the industry to bring code, to bring components that can then be integrated into these new networks. This is a reason why we are committed to and strongly drive the work in OpenDaylight. Very pleased to see that in less than a year you made the release possible, and we think that this has shown the way in terms of what we can do, not only in data centers, but also across the networks in the service provider domain. We still have a way to go, obviously. We've taken the first steps, and it's very encouraging. This is also why we today launched an initiative which is basically a lab facility to be able to do trials and verification of SDN applications and switches underneath the controller. This is one step in terms of fostering collaboration in the OpenDaylight community and also open up the labs to do testing, maybe initially from smaller companies who would like to make sure that they can integrate and verify towards a stable hydrogen release, but also long-term as a means to foster more collaboration in this community. So this is both for the northbound as well as the southbound interfaces from the controller. This lab, by the way, is hosted just down the road here in our San Jose facility. And you see at the bottom there is a way to sign up and to get a slot to start testing if you have applications, if you have switches that you would like to test against this release. There's also a web page available for you to sign up. Okay, open source and OpenDaylight, it's all extremely important. Ericsson believes in openness. We believe in collaboration across the industry. We believe firmly in competitors coming together, driving common implementations, but also, as I said earlier, driving common standards to foster a bigger ecosystem and a bigger community that can develop towards a common architecture. So that's the reason why I would like to share with you. I think many of you have probably seen what Ericsson is driving in terms of SDN across service provider space, what we call the service provider SDN. But for those of you who are not familiar with it, it is basically the ability to converge the complete network, including access, including transport, including the IP edge, all the way to the data center, into a common network platform, Different from a data center and IT platform, but sharing many of the characteristics of an IT platform in terms of controlled APIs to networking, to compute and storage. But this is obviously on a network and distributed scale. So here you have the ability to run applications and host workloads all the way out to the access, all the way out to the base station, or you can, for efficiency reasons or cost reasons, choose to host some of the workloads higher up in the network, and you have a common virtualization layer. You have a common infrastructure to build on. And this gives you not only the flexibility to move the workloads, it also opens up for new business opportunities when it comes to meeting performance requirements that we have not yet been able to meet as an industry because of latency being too long, or because of inability to do optimization for the smartphones or the tablets or the sensors that are connected to the mobile infrastructure, or because there is some imperfection in the backbone in terms of connecting to the remote data centers. All of these things can now be addressed with a common horizontal layer where applications are hosted where they fit. So that means that we have an abstraction and a virtualization layer based on OpenStack, and on top of that we have a cross-domain control. This is different, of course, from an SDN controller's interface between a switch and a controller. This is different from the northbound interfaces from the SDN controller to the OpenStack or other network management systems. This is cross-domain, across geography, in order to be able to set up and configure across domains. Very different from per node or per domain, basically cutting across all the domains, from access with management and control into IP and transport and the edge, all the way out to the data center and the cloud. So this is what we are adding to the basic definitions of SDN. The other thing that we're adding to that basic definition that we're all familiar with is common management, cross-domain management that cuts across. And this is then allowing us to not only manage provision workloads wherever they need to be located, but we can also reach out from the network, from the service provider network, all the way to a distant data center in hybrid cloud fashions with management that cuts across. Of course, this requires federation. Of course, this requires a lot of business agreements and collaboration to come in place. But we see this fundamentally as the enablers that needs to be put in place to drive growth in terms of our customers, operators, service providers, being able to offer enterprise services, but also for all these other industries that are not yet mobile, not yet cloudified, to come on board in terms of meeting their requirements of their services. So it cuts across, it's cross-domain management and cross-domain orchestration. And on top, of course, this is very much about how can we leverage the assets that the network already have. How can we make that available in a programmatic way to other industries? And I think you've seen us share already some things that we are doing with the car industry, being able to hook up all the car fleets, not only in transportation, but for normal cars, launch some of these things back in CES. But it's very much about all the other industries that have not yet come on board. How can we present this network platform to them in a sensible way? Well, I think that the answer to that is a mixture of tools. It's a mixture of technology and business agreements, of course. But no doubt, it needs to be simplified for those other industries to connect. I will come back to that in a moment. So where are we when it comes to service provider SDN in the industry? Well, if we look at three parts, the technology, the business models, and the operations. Technology, obviously, the things that we can drive now with work with NFV, work with early proof of concepts, and testing it out in early networks. When it comes to the business models, it's about identifying the use cases, finding the flexibility in terms of rolling out, but also validating the cost savings. And they are there. Obviously, in many cases, there is a big benefit in cost savings. But then, not the least, the operations part. And there, of course, we have most still to do. This is very early days in terms of deploying this cross-domain. But we see also a very promising sign when it comes to leading operators around the world who would like to deploy early use cases and integrate it into the normal operations. But this is going from labs now into the networks. It's about migration and coexistence, obviously, with the existing infrastructure. But it's very much about the human aspects of this. This is about transforming internal processes, the things that have to do with competence build-out, responsibilities. And I think you can all imagine that across large service providers, large operators, this is a daunting task. This is a major issue, of course. That's why we depict it like this. We're basically halfway into the technology side. We have started in terms of getting a common understanding of the businesses of this, and we're just at the very early stage when it comes to moving into operations. And of course, from our point of view, ensuring robustness and resiliency, making sure that these networks remain stable and can give not only the mobile, broadband, smartphones and tablets good service, but also all the fixed and TV connections, the right grade and quality of service while we make this transition. That's absolutely important. So this is still a long way to go, but we've taken the important first steps. So I'm coming back to this way of how can we make it simple, easy enough for other industries to connect to our network platform. Well, we've talked about APIs, and of course, if you present APIs, then you have developers that are skilled enough to work with those high and low level APIs. But if you talk to enterprises, SMBs, that may not even have an IT department any longer, they have outsourced it or they are working with service providers closely since before, how can they get access to these new assets that we have already put in place in the network? And again, I'm not talking only about a VPN for a certain bandwidth or a secure tunnel or something like that. I'm talking about requirements that would require some of the workload to be distributed out in the infrastructure to have short enough latencies for interactive services, for not only enterprise services, but in the future, control applications that need to have a very fast turnaround. How can we get those requirements implemented in an automated fashion, still allowing those enterprises and SMBs to feel that they are in control? They know what they're paying for, they know what they have signed up for. Well, this is where our concept of network slices comes in. Network slices is simply a way to look at the physical network into a number of logical networks, not only, as I said, networking, but also also compute and storage. So moving caches further out, having processing further out to reduce latency and improve performance is part of this network slice. And in this way, we've been able to demonstrate that you can actually serve fleet management applications, companies who have high demand video, upload and download applications in the field, running over LTE, real systems, being able to guarantee quality of service, being able to push out part of the application and part of the storage for that application all the way into the infrastructure to get the required performance. And from their side, from the enterprise side, from the internal IT or from the CIO side in the company, simple interfaces, web-based interfaces towards these network slices, where simple requirements, high-level requirements are directly matched into network infrastructure configuration on a second and minute basis, and corresponding cost of service is derived and fed back to that external enterprise or SMB. So I think also here we're talking about early days. I think many of you have been onto this before. It's not rocket science in terms of the technology. It's not rocket science in terms of what we actually think can be done. The challenge is, of course, to make it work across the network. The challenge is to start with those bottlenecks that are really hampering the user experience and the performance. And they come very much from the mobility angle. That's why in our earlier demonstrations, our use cases, and our proof of concepts, we have made sure to include the real LTE network, the real packet core network, the real policy controller, the real data center applications, and so forth, everything coming together. And it does not require rip and replace of all the intermediate network gear. It just requires to start where we have the biggest bottlenecks. And again, we are very much looking forward to working with this community and others, of course, in terms of building components into this network slice, because we firmly believe that this is a way forward in terms of addressing new industries, in terms of growth, in terms of business opportunities, and certainly addressing all those enterprises that have not yet come online or come into mobile and cloud. Final word on next step. I mentioned that we had moved already from 3G to 4G LTE to LTE Advanced, and the next step beyond that is obviously 5G, but it will take some time. So here I'm more inviting everyone basically to think about this in terms of what are the requirements that you would like to put onto these future systems. Of course, it will take years, maybe 4, 5, 6 years to actually engineer them and to make sure that they end up in workable deployments across the world. But if you think about 2020, it's still not that far out. So requirements and being able to funnel innovation into these future systems, these 5G systems, is also something that we're very much driving. So we're looking for collaboration in that area. In conclusion, open source. Ericsson is very much driving open source, very much driving modernizing networks with open innovation. More eyes on the problem. None of us is big enough in terms of R&D to be able to drive all the innovation that is required. And this community, OpenDaylight, and the OpenDaylight Summit here is a very important vehicle for that. When it comes to hydrogen, we're very pleased that the project has delivered in less than a year. We're also pleased to be able to host SDN application providers and others to test and verify in the Ericsson lab. And when it comes to the SDN progress, of course, data center, we all know that's happening. But when it comes to the service provider side, we see very good signs. And when it comes to exposing these functions, these network slices is a way that we think we can ease for those other industries to come on board. So with that, I'd like to thank you, everyone. Thanks very much.